Hello, I'm here with my bass guitar, and it's at night, so I don't want to bug my neighbors, so I won't be plugging in. That's okay. I want to talk about how I play, technique, ergonomics, efficiency, and I also want to talk about the history of the instrument. The first thing is, this is not a bass guitar, it's a double bass guitar or a contrabass guitar, just as the upright instrument is a double bass viol or a contrabass viol. In the Middle Ages, Arab Berbers from North Africa, who were part of the Umayyad Caliphate, conquered Andalusia, and they set up an Islamic Spain/Portugal called Al-Andalus, and they brought instruments with them. They also brought advanced mathematics, new translations of classical Greek writers. They brought a lot of learning with them, medicine, and they basically really jump-started intellectual life in Europe. And they brought instruments like the oud, which al-oud in Arabic means the wood, and that became laud. Al-oud became laud, lute, liuto, and that's what we call the lute. The lute is the Europeanized oud, and they had smaller, similar instruments called gambus, or convus as it's called in Yemen, and it's still barely played, but Yemen is in very bad shape. And this became the gittern, but it combined with another instrument that had been in Europe since the Roman Empire, called the cetra. The names converge. Cetra, citol, gittern, it became guitar, guitarra. The tar suffix is Proto-Indo-European and Sanskrit for string. So tar just means string. There's ektar, one string, dutar, two string. This would be a four string. Sitar, cittern, zither, zitter, all these words are related. And there was a convergence of the Roman instrument and the one coming from North Africa and also the Middle East. So anyway, European luthiers were experimenting with it and adapting it in new shapes and playing with the bow and also plucking it. They also called it the viola, or the viola, which is a specific instrument now, but it was just a general term then for string instrument. Excuse me. So there was in the 15th century, there was the viola da mano, played with the hand, the viola da pinola with the plectrum, the viola da gamba held between the legs, the viola da braccio held like a violin. In the 16th century, they started being adapted, set up for these specific roles, and certain ones were made for bowing, viola de arco, or in Spain, vihuela de arco, and then viola de mano, played with the hand. And these and guitars kind of developed side by side. Guitars were for more simple strummed accompaniments, for singers to accompany themselves or to accompany others. And then the fancy stuff was played on the vihuela, or the lute, and that's the fancy fingerstyle music. So with the lute, it started out like the gittern, played with a plectrum. They used quills, like feathers, like they used for writing, and the other end would stick out between their fingers, and they would play like that, and they still do in North Africa. But whatever, they held it horizontally, and they played melodically with a pick. strong, weak, strong, weak. Not like how a lot of people trying to play now, where every note is the same. There was a natural bounce to it that is very musical, and it mimics the way European languages are spoken and many others. In the 16th century, going into it, people wanted to do more. They wanted to play more than one line on one instrument, on one lute or one viola. So they put down the pick and they started using their fingers. And the picking motion, it's the same as now when you hand somebody an acoustic guitar and they're used to playing with a pick, but you don't have one on you. And so they kind of pinch their fingers and pretend they have a pick. You've seen it. That's what happened in the turn of the 16th century. So they used the thumb for the down beat and the strong beat, and then they would come up with the index for the weak beat, and they would mimic the same strong, weak, bouncy motion, and they still played horizontally. You see it in old paintings. They held it higher, but my strap's not that high. The horizontal position makes it so your lower arm is roughly parallel to the strings, so you can get leverage with your elbow. And what people did was they rested their small finger on the soundboard and used it as a fulcrum, right? So a balancing point, and they rocked back and forth. You hold your hand open like it upward, like it's holding a cup, and you just bounce. Thumb stays under the index finger. It's called thumb under technique. And the thumb is very strong, and the index is just a light brush. It doesn't have to be much. Of course, on this big bass guitar, I have to pluck harder. No rest stroke or anything like that, just free stroke. But then what you can do is play alternate strings at the same time. You couldn't do that with a pick. You had to play consecutive ones, or else dodge around them and be artful. But this opened up different possibilities. You could use 4 fingers, you could use 3, whatever you want, but this one rested. And there's not so much I can do on this 4-string instrument, but when you have 6, you can do everything a classical guitarist can do. And what they would do is they would imitate vocal music that was written for a choir of maybe 3 or 4 parts, and they would play all the parts on a lute. You can go up to 4 and do pretty well. 5 gets tough. 3 is easier. 2 is very nimble. 1's a breeze, and you feel like you're wasting the potential of the instrument. And then in the 17th century, it rotated and gained more bass strings, just as guitars are doing now, electrics. And the thumb came out, stuck out like a hitchhiker's thumb, like this. And then the thumb could play rest stroke easily and just rest on the next string, and you just let gravity do the work for you. And that's how I play the bass guitar. That's my main finger. This is the best finger you have. This is the thickest sound. It's thicker than a pick. It's natural. It's not real tense like this, but you can do that too. And you can rest your thumb on one of the bass strings. You can even, I'm going to slow down. Easier with the lute, but it's like having 2 hands operating independently on a keyboard instrument, but instead of 2 hands you have the thumb playing bass, and then these 2 fingers playing a line above it. So or for 4-note chords you can bring in the ring. So that became the standard, and it stuck around, and classical guitar took it up. The lute fell out of fashion in the mid-18th century because it was just, by that point, it had become too complicated and people wanted something simpler. So the guitar filled its role from being a pretty simple accompaniment instrument to being the instrument that carried on the complex fingerstyle tradition. Although there was very highly developed, elaborate guitar music prior, in the 17th century and even in the 16th, but that was fancy courtly stuff mostly. Anyway, this thing is, you can call it a viol if you want, you can call it a guitar if you want, everybody argues, but the important thing is to call it a double bass or a contrabass. And the reason for that is, if I had a regular modern 6-string guitar here and I was playing a bass line on it, I could read off of sheet music written in bass clef, and I could play it and it would sound at the same pitch. But if I had this guitar and I was reading the same bass part written in bass clef, I would sound an octave lower. That's the contra, that's the double part. And this is the same as the upright instrument. There's no reason it should not be called the same thing, double bass or contrabass. It's just the nomenclature has gotten dumbed down over the centuries, and this is a young instrument anyway. It's not even a century old, so it doesn't have any history in a sense, but it has, millennia. It's part of this much older tradition that I'm just scratching the surface of. Okay, now for playing the thing, if I let go of my hands, it doesn't neck dive, it doesn't do that. I can position it and it'll stay pretty sturdy at an angle. And if I play with a pick, I like the old horizontal angle, so my lower arm can be parallel with the strings and have leverage, like a bluegrass flat picker. And if I were doing that all the time, I would wear it up high like this. And people think it looks stupid, but if you look at art from ancient Mesopotamia, you see the same thing. You see people doing this. It's nothing new. You look at art in like classical Chinese art through the centuries, and same thing. Now they play more vertically, except in the South they still play more horizontally. But anyway, these things are as old as time, and if somebody gives you crap for it, just tell them they don't know their history. I mitigated the neck dive with this by putting ultralight tuners, fancy hip shot ultralight tuners made of aluminum or something, so it's just less weight. It helps a lot. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can put fishing weights or something on the underside on this end to counterbalance it, but I don't want to make this thing any heavier. I do mitigate the weight with a very wide strap. It's padded and comfortable. This is 4-inch wide. I use them for everything. I use them for regular guitar too. So that's as comfortable as I can get on this instrument with the playing position. Now with my hands, excuse me, I extend my left arm out and I fold it back vertically. And what happens is my fingers don't align parallel with the frets. They stay vertical. And these three form a rough line that is roughly parallel with the frets. But the index is too short, you see. So I move the other ones down, I curl them to bring them all four in line with the frets. So the index stays pretty straight and the other ones curl to compensate. And that is how I play. And my elbow stays tucked in. It doesn't flap around, or you see people doing this, they're killing their wrists. Look at that. So I stay like that, and with the index I fret with the side of it almost. I'm going to mark it, rub it really hard so you can see the indentation. I don't know if you can see that or not. It's like 45 degrees right there, like that. And with bar chords on 6-string guitar, I do the same thing. I fret with the angled side of it, not flat. And then the thumb stays on the back center of the neck, and it's a pivot point, a fulcrum, just like on cello. On cello, you play like this. I used to play cello. In modern cello, you stick your elbow out, but in Baroque cello, you let it rest. like that. So when you get to the bass strings, you rock your arm to this side, and to the treble strings, you rock it back. And it's the same with guitar, like this. It's a little more awkward on guitar, but we adapt. I do think these things are too long, and that we should be playing 6-string basses that are shorter, that have fewer frets and less need to move up to them, less need for shifting along the strings, and more ability to play across them to make things more efficient. By the way, that was pretty standard. In the 16th century, bass instruments generally had 6 strings, tuned in fourths with a third in the middle, just like guitars now. In the 17th, some of them gained a 7th, lower 4th added, but just another 4th on the stack. It's the same idea, and they came in different sizes and different keys, so you could have whatever range you needed. But that stuff was so efficient. They only needed like 7 frets or so. They never went up past that, and they would play here in the, like where the cowboy chords are, and where the strings are longest. They would aim for using as many open strings as possible, and feeling that, they would go for the lowest frets possible instead of playing up here all the time. And then when they got to when they played a scale from the bottom to the top, they would go up, or they would go across rather, and then they would go up the top string and back, and then like that. Now that may seem strange because you have to do a lot of shifting along the top string, but you can mitigate. Like if you need high notes often, you know, you can move across and stay in that area, just as long as you're not jumping around needlessly. Now you do see the Indian classical traditions where they do a melody across one string, or maybe 2, but it's all motion across the strings, and they get very fluent. So it can be done. It's just, I think it's harder. It's not the Western tradition anyway. Both are valid, and both are storied and highly developed. Let's see what else. I talked about the thumb. I talked about pulling the elbow in. I talked about the angle, forming a line with the strings, and then it's kind of a windshield wiper motion. That's good with the left hand. Oh yes, one more thing. The jazz guitarist Johnny Smith, who was big in the 1950s, illustrated an idea very elegantly. He said, picture a line being drawn from the lowest string at the nut to the highest string at the top fret, a diagonal line bisecting the fingerboard. He said everything on this side of the neck sounds better than the equivalent notes played on this side. Like if you have an open G, this is the best sound, the open string, and then the next best sound is the 5th fret on the next string, and then the next best is the 10th fret on the next string, and then what, 15, 14, 12, and 14, 15 on the next. Like that sounds like nothing, it's on chiff. So stay on this side of that diagonal line. It's the same as the old Renaissance idea, pretty much. Okay, right hand. When you're playing the upright bass, the contrabass viol, the natural thing to do when playing pizzicato is to rest your thumb on the end of the fingerboard and pluck with your index finger, and let the next string catch it like a trampoline, like a rest stroke. The Spanish word is apoyando stroke. And on a real bass, not this awkward thing, you can put the weight of your arm into it and let gravity work. I can't demonstrate it on this flat guitar, but you can you can put some weight into it and really fall into the string. You can't do that on a bass guitar because the angle is so different. People did anyway when they switched over first, like James Jamerson, who learned on an upright bass. He switched to a Fender, and he kept using his index finger. He called it the hook. All those Motown bass lines, even when they were like 16th note runs, it was always index finger. But I don't think that's right, because you have to bend your wrist, and if you do that for years, you're gonna get carpal tunnel problems. And there was a classical guitarist named Ida Presti in the 20th century who had a technique kind of like that, and some people followed her, and I think it's the most unnatural thing in the world. Your body tells you what it likes and what it doesn't. And what mine told me is, it said Wes Montgomery and George Benson were right, and they used their thumb. They were six-string players, not bass players, but the early bass players also, electric bass players also liked using their thumb. I know Jamerson didn't, but other people did. If you look at a 50s or a 60s Fender bass or something similar, it's got a tug bar here. It doesn't have the thumb rest. It's the same thing, but on the other side. People moved it over later. The original idea was something to hang on to with your fingers so that your thumb was free to play. But you don't need it. Just hang on the strings, right? And get out of the way when you're playing the G string or whatever your highest string is, and just rest on the body. And it's just like that old lute and classical guitar technique where your thumb sticks out like a hitchhiker and just falls through one string and gets caught on the next. Another benefit is when you're going from a high string to a lower string, you mute the previous string by resting on it. I do this all the time on lute and theorbo. A lot of these instruments developed like extra bass strings tuned to a diatonic scale, like a harp, kind of like a harp guitar that you see sometimes now. And you just go down. It's like playing pedals on a pipe organ with your feet. And the only way to get that to sound good and to feel good is by playing rest stroke like that and letting the next string catch you, and when you go down, dampening the previous note. Same thing on this, even though it's 4 strings. So this is my hybrid technique, compiled from different instruments across hundreds of years. It's not the right way to play anything. I don't believe in that. I just believe in physics and ergonomics. This is your best finger. It's the fullest, thickest sound, and it's warmer than a pick, and it's the most ergonomic. I can play with a straight wrist. I can play with a cast on my wrist and not be hindered in any way. And then if I want to bring other stuff into it, I've got these two right here. I don't need this on bass, maybe on a 6-string guitar if I want to play 4-note chords. This never. You just don't need it. See, you do what you want. And then, well, I do want to talk about a couple other things first. Plectrum. I mitigate the clicking harsh sound in 2 ways, in 3 ways. 1, I set this thing up old school with flat wound strings. These are big old labellas, but I like Tomastic Infelds too for a slinkier sound that has a kind of envelope filter sound to it naturally. It goes, Byow. It sounds musical. It sounds like speech. These are thumpier and thuddier, and they have more oomph and low end. Just like that milk chocolate kind of sound. So I do that, and then I put foam. You can't see it because it's black. Maybe you can. I put a piece of tough foam underneath the ends of the strings. I cut this out of a packaging from an aftermarket pickup. So I stuff that in, and that gets rid of some of the sustain, because I don't want to pluck a string and just have it go, bah, especially this G string. It sounds awful. I want to cut out some of that so it sounds more like an upright. So it goes burn, not burn. Like I don't want it just to sound like an organ note. Sometimes I do. And then I also combine that with palm muting, and then I can adjust. So if I'm playing with a pick, I can be fast, and I can be bouncy, and I can palm mute. I've got that range of palm muting, and I've got this range of vowels. All the way to the sounding center of the string. That's like ooh, I. Here it's all fundamental. And if you touch the node there, it gets rid of the fundamental. This is the warmest sound, most like a sine wave without any overtones. And then as you get closer to the end, you bring more overtones into it. It's like rolling the highs up on the mixer. And here, you get right by the end. It sounds wrong, it's all like this. The fundamental is less and the overtones are more proportionally. And you have to pluck harder as you get away from the center of the string to get the same volume. Looser feel, tighter feel, warmer, bassier, brighter, more trebly. I play like electronica. You hear filter sweeps on that stuff. You hear like trance music that goes. They use this huge timbral range. I do everything I can on a bass guitar to make it sound vocal and expressive. Even with the fingers, I do the same thing. Just can't move around as quickly. Sometimes I hang out up here. Thumb for the low strings, index and middle for the high ones. Now here, with fingering, on a smaller instrument, like a regular guitar, I'm going to call these 1, 2, 3, 4. I use 3 for the bass side and 4 for the treble side. But for something as big as a double bass guitar, I'm going to use a lot of 1 and 4. I don't want to stretch. I want to condense. This is adduction. This is subduction. I want subduction. Ductio means draw. I want to draw them together. I don't believe in this 1 finger per fret rule. I think that kills people's hands, especially when you teach it to young kids. I think it's terrible because we're not playing chromatic music where we need all the frets all the time. You don't need it. Use the open strings. That's stuff you don't have to fret. Use them, and you can get away with 2 fingers. But here's what I do. What I do is I start on 4, and then I put 3 under it, so they overlap. If you keep going, you can do either one in the middle. Just put the 4 on top and the 3 on the bottom. Depends on how far you're going, just do what feels natural. That's my general rule for left-hand fingering. I learned that studying lute, and I apply it to every instrument I play. Except as the strings scales get longer, I use more outer fingers, just because it's more comfortable, and especially at these low frets that are thick, that are farther apart. If I'm up here, it doesn't much matter. I can do 3 fingers per string, and it's fine. So just let your hands tell you what they want, and don't do this bullshit. I'm sorry, but it's just needless stretching. And sometimes if I'm playing consecutive frets, I don't use consecutive fingers if I don't have to. Sometimes it feels better just subducting and skipping a finger. And with 2 frets, I don't always do that. Sometimes I do that. Why not? Also learned that playing lute. There is a good habit I used to have when I started on cello, and I've since it's fallen out of disuse because I've been playing plucked instruments with less string tension. But now, as I'm playing bass guitar a lot, I'm bringing it back. And what that is as you play consecutive fingers along one string, you leave the old ones down, as opposed to letting go. I'm exaggerating. Like, why would you need to do that? Just relax into it. So by the time the pinky's down, these 3 are also behind it. And the middle ones don't matter, but the outer ones divide the pressure between them somewhat evenly. If this is working alone, it takes on more, it takes on all the weight by itself, but the other ones mitigate. Especially up the neck when the action gets high, and mine's cranked up pretty high. That really helps. What else? Compound lines. This was common in the Baroque period. It was used in classical music. People now who play bass and don't study other instruments don't generally learn it. And it's a shame, because they could do so much more with their instruments than just playing a simple bass line. Now, if you're in a 7-piece band, everybody's doing their thing, and you want to play simple, and you don't want to get in the way. But if you're playing in a 3-piece, you might have to hustle a little harder and work to get more out of your instrument, in which case you can use what's called a compound line. For example, this is a simple bass line. One, two, three, four. But also, I can play a tenor line. And then if I put them together and alternate, there, sorry. Sometimes I play them together. You can do different rhythms, but that is a compound line when you alternate, and when you play them together, or there, that's 2-part counterpoint. Thumb, index. Well, no, I'm using middle. It fits better. I use index here. So I've got 1 finger per string. That's where they fall. For me, that's comfortable. Do what you want. But the idea is, even if you only do a little bit of that tenor line, just that octave jump right after the downbeat. You can add little accents like a drummer would, and you can really start to play this thing like a drum set. And you can imply a thicker polyphonic texture. Even though you're only playing 1 note at once, you can imply 2 voices going at the same time. That's called implied polyphony or compound line. Yeah, the Van Halen thing, the eruption, the tapping thing, that's implied polyphony. one line is playing one note on the open string, and the other one is going up and down, and you just alternate back and forth to zigzag between them to make two dotted lines. That's what it is. Here's another thing I do. When I'm playing 12-bar blues structure, whether it's rock and roll or boogie woogie or straight up blues or whatever, if it's harmonically 12-bar, 1, 4, 5, and all the chords are dominant 7th chords, this is what I do. I'm going to play up here because I'm going to be playing chords on top, and I want them to sound good. So I'm not going to make it sound muddy down here. I'm going to play in the key of G. Here's my 1 chord. This is the G note. Here's the 4, C, 5, D, 1, G. So I want a G7 chord. So I'm going to play the G. That's the first note. 1, 2, 3, G, A, B. So I've got a major third. 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, G, A, B, C, D, E, F natural. I'm using that pinky with the third finger underneath. That forms a minor 7th, which is part of the dominant 7th chord, with a D in the bass and a C on top. Okay, and then the middle is the major third of the chord. So I got a major third and a minor 7th, and I do not need a 5th. That's enough to triangulate the harmony. It's called a shell voicing or a shell chord. We have the 3rd and the 7th, or maybe the 7th moves to a 6th, depending on what kind of chord it is, but generally something like that. And then when I go from 1 in the bass to 4, from G to C, all I have to do is slide those down a semitone, 1 fret, and I have another dominant 7th chord on the 4 chord. What happens is, here's G, here's B, the third of it. That third moves down and becomes the 7th of the C chord. Here's C, here's B flat, B, B flat. So the third becomes the 7th, and the 7th becomes the 3rd. The G, the 7th above G is C, I'm sorry, F. Hang on, my phone's blown up. It slides down to E. Right? So they flip, this is a tritone, moving either way, but the 3rd of the 1 chord is the 7th of the 4 chord, and the 7th of the 1 chord is the 3rd of the 4 chord. And then up 2 frets, there's your 5 chord. It's the same as the 4. So I can just go, and when I play rhythm guitar, that's all I do. Just put a bass line under it, or sorry, 1, 4, 5, 1, that's the blues. If you're playing a minor blues, you alter it. But it's the same idea, just minimal voice leading with shell chord voicings. And then you can do another thing. My phone's about to die. You can take the bass note and move it down or up a tritone. So you can have chromatic voice leading from 1. Here's its tritone substitution, because you're substituting the bass by 1 that's a tritone away. And now what was the 3rd is now the 7th, and what was the 7th is now the 3rd. You can use that to lead into the 4 chord chromatically. And then you can use the 4 chords tritone substitution to lead up chromatically to the 1 chord. 5, 4, tritone sub, 1, 5, tritone sub, flat 2, 1. You do a 2-5-1 cadence like that. Here's 1, here's 2, G, A. Instead of going 2-5-1, A, D, G, A, D, G, you can go A flat, G, 2, flat 2 with the tritone sub, 1.